Hi there, this is Neil with the Fix Yourself channel, and I suppose it's about time I get done with these window boxes. They've been sitting around for taking up room in the shop for quite some time, and also it's starting to get warm out. Spring is upon us, and I can't have these things not done when my wife wants to plant flowers. So I got them half built here. They've actually been half built since before I even thought of having a YouTube channel. So it's time to get them done and get them out of the way. Not really going to spend too much time showing you how to actually cut the wood and things. I'm sure you know how to use a saw. The ideal saw for this is a power miter box, but you can just as easily use a table saw, or you can use a circular saw. You can use a jigsaw. If you have the patience, you can even use a handsaw. God, my dad used to build just about everything with a handsaw. I hardly ever use them. But there's also a certain amount of satisfaction of doing things with strictly hand tools. But God, I just can't. I tell you, you just can't beat the power miter saw. They perform such a square cut, better than you can get with a table saw. Table saw might be a little more versatile, but for making nice, clean cross cuts and angle cuts, miter cuts, it's darn hard to beat those power miter saws. Now, so what we're just going to do mostly here is focus on tips on building these things, because I'm sure you all know how to do the actual individual procedures as far as cutting and things. But one thing I want to mention to you is it's a lot easier if you do all your steps of one process for all your boxes at one time. Like cut all your boxes to length first, and then drill all your holes. So, you know, the final step is just assembly. It's easy as hell. Everything's ready to rock and roll. And that way you're only doing your long cuts once. You're only doing your side cuts once. It'll just speed up the whole process. But one word of caution, build yourself a prototype first. Build a box, even though it's a slower way of doing it, build one box all by itself first. Because so often there's some unforeseen thing, and oh, I got to change this in the design. Particularly when you take them up to the house and actually try to attach in the house. You might find they need to be a little bit longer, a little bit shorter, a little bit wider, what have you. So build one first, and then after that, if you're building like 5, you can build the other 4 with doing all the steps for every box at once. It'll speed things up. But make that first prototype and test it out, test fit it, and make sure it's going to work. Now, the other thing I want to mention is there's 2 ways. You got glue guys and screw guys. You know, some people love to use glue because they don't like the look of fasteners, and personally, I don't mind the look of fasteners. I think they look kind of cool. But if you're the kind of person that can't stand the look of fasteners, I guess you can glue them together. There's people out there that say that glue is stronger than nails or screws. Well, maybe, but I'll also tell you, glue is only as strong as the outermost part of the wood itself. Glue is only holding at that joint right there, where the screw, in this case, is holding all the way into about there. So, you know, like I say, the screw is holding all the way about into there. So I guess it's a matter of opinion. I like fasteners. I hate messing with glue. I've been disappointed by glue so many times. Glue's let me down. You know, a joint will come undone. Plus, with assembly time, you have to clamp it and wait for it to dry. I want to get stuff done. I'll admit it, I'm not a big glue fan. I'm not saying that you glue people out there are wrong. I'm just saying I'm not a big fan of glue. You can do it any way you want, but I'm not a big fan of glue. Now, the cost on these window boxes, if you're just to buy them already assembled, they're about 25 bucks a piece. Now, how much are you going to be saving here if you build them yourself? Not a whole lot when you could look at money alone. One of these 12-foot long boards, cedar boards from Home Depot, was about 17 bucks, and there's just about enough to build 2 with one of these 12-foot long boards. to build 2 window boxes. But the way we're building them, if you were to purchase a cedar window box, it's a complete box made of cedar, and you just fill it full of dirt. Well, wet dirt and wood, even a rot-resistant wood like cedar, it's not a good combination. So what I did is I bought these liners, and they're about $8 a piece. Now, you can just drop them. The advantage of that is the window box will be permanently attached to your house, but you can take the liner out and you can actually do your potting, putting your flowers in the liner on a workbench or wherever it's convenient for you, and then you can just stick the whole liner in the window box. There's all kinds of advantages too. In the winter time, if you want to put like Christmas greenery in there, you can remove those liners and fill them full of evergreen boughs. It makes things a little more versatile, but most importantly, it keeps your wood from rotting out. Like I said, these liners are about $8 a piece, and since you're using the liners, if you decide to go that route, you don't really need to have a bottom in one of these window boxes. I do have a cross piece in there for support, just to keep it from bowing out. But the liner itself just rests right on the top of the box. The lip of this liner is wider than the dimensions of the box, so it just sets right in there like that. And so it saves you spending the money for a bottom piece of wood. But so if the board is, what did I say, $17, and you can do 2 of them, you got wood cost of about $8.50, a lumber cost of about $8.50, and you know the screws are negligible, and the liners are $8. So for around $17 a box, you can build these exactly the width of your window. You don't have to worry about them rotting out. So they do have some advantages over the pre-made ones. They're a little bit cheaper, but money isn't your main thing. It's the fact that you're more versatile. You can build exactly what you want, and it's, you know, rot resistance. The disadvantage with these liners is that you're pretty much locked in to having a square side profile of your window box. And, you know, traditionally a window box, I think, looks a little better if its side profile looks something like this. You know, if this was the front and then right here was the house, right in that area, having it slant out instead of just being a square like that, like we're making. I think this shape looks a little better than a square, but with the liner, you're locked into that because, you know, your liner is basically square. So your box has got to be the shape of the liner. That's just the way it is. I mean, maybe you can find liners that have a shape like I was mentioning before, but I couldn't. This is what I had. One other thing, the cedar wood, you have 2 choices. One side of it is plain, the other side is rough cut. So if you have more of a rustic style home, you might want to use the rough cut. I assembled one like this with the rough side out, and just to see if my wife liked that better. She tends not to like rustic type things, so she wanted the smooth side out, so that's the way we're going to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to assemble the rest of these, and then we'll put some protective stain on them, and then we'll mount them to the house. Once you got your screw holes lined up on your first board, then in your subsequent boards, you just stack one on top of the other, and then clamp them up in your vise. And then you can use your holes you drilled on the first board for the pilot holes for doing all the rest of the holes on your subsequent boards. It's going to speed things up. You only had to measure 1 time for on your first board, and everything's going to come out exactly the same. I do caution you, however, make sure you make that first prototype. Make sure everything's right before you do this, and you cut and drill all your boards, because the disadvantage is you're going to transfer, if you have any mistakes, you're going to transfer them to every board. One other thing is to look over your lumber before you use it and before you start cutting and drilling, and find out its optimal way to be orientated for use. In this particular one, there's not. I think I'd rather have that on the bottom rather than the top. Not that that's going to make that much difference, but more importantly, on this board here, I want to have the holes drilled for my bottom spreader board I want this knot near the top because it would be right where that hole is going to be drilled. Now you can drill through the knot easy enough, but it's going to be really hard to put your screw through the knot. You might end up either cracking the board or breaking your screw off. So look at your boards and see where the screws are going to go before you make any commitments. And orientate the boards, so that you're not drilling holes for fasteners through knots. It'll just make things a little bit easier. One other thing here's a tip there. You really aren't going to be able to use, you will go through with the spirit of, yeah, I'm going to take him up on that one. But just the way things go down, you're not going to be following this and you're going to end up in the same mess. You got these, your fasteners, deck screws here. It could be anything, but deck screws in our case right now. Traditionally, they always had, your Phillips screwdriver head, okay? Which is the most common. The nice thing about that is you always have Phillips screwdriver, you always have Phillips screwdriver bits. The disadvantage is they strip. The square drive ones are a little bit nicer. They don't strip quite as easily. The disadvantage, and you know what it is, your chance of having a screwdriver or driver bit is much, much less. And then finally, and I kind of bought these by accident. I was in the store, I was in a hurry. These are Star Drive or Torx Drive bits here. And they have even better capability to withstand a lot of torque without stripping. But now you have a situation where you're even less likely to have a driver or a bit. So I'd say avoid getting these, except for one thing. Over the course of time, it's probably almost impossible to avoid getting these. You'll buy them by accident. Or you'll be doing a project where you just can't afford to have them strip out, and they absolutely are better, okay? But then you have one more bit. Or even worse is when you have something assembled with several different types of heads fasteners, particularly if you got 90% one and 10% the other, and you got one bit in your driver, and you might be disassembling something and repairing, you're just flying through, and all of a sudden you put it on a fastener and it's not turning, and you wonder what the hell's going on. Well, holy cow, it's a different type of head on it. But there's probably no avoiding it. You're going to end up having screws with multiple types of heads on them. There's only one thing you can do, is get a bit for each type. And don't just get one. They're cheap, okay? Over the course of time, you'll just run across stuff and you'll have plenty of bits of every type, so you'll be covered. But when you start out, if you got a job with this has a Star Drive bit or a square drive, don't just get one. These things are cheap. Buy several. You can buy them a piece, or you can buy an assortment. If you just buy one, you're going to be taking that square drive bit out of your driver. You'll end up setting it down somewhere, and you won't be able to find it. Get several of those little bits, whether it's the square drive or Torx drive, because you will inevitably misplace them. So you'll be able to just go grab another if you bought several, and they're cheap. I have something expensive. Yeah, you're not going to go and buy several air compressors, okay, or several torches. But on this cheap shit, where it is not worth the time looking for it, and you'll be tearing your hair out, buy several. Have your ass covered on that. On your drills, now obviously this is not the best quality drill, and not only that, it's a drill driver, but it's not a driver specifically. I don't have any drivers. I just use drills. Quite often with this drill, I will use I got something here. I bought a cheap 1/4-inch drive socket extension, about 6-inch long, and I just cut off the female end of it, and then I ground it into a triangle shape, so I can put it in a drill. So I can use any drill for a driver. It works pretty good. They got pretty good torque, one of these 3/8 plug-in type drills. And for things you'd normally use a 1/4-inch drive for, it works darn good. That way you don't need a separate tool. If you find yourself using a small impact all the time, by all means get one. But I either am using a 1/2 inch impact, and for the smaller things, I'll use hand tools. When I have things where I got to drive a lot, I'll just use the drill, and it's always worked fine for me. By the way, neither one of these is very high quality drills, but I got this one at a swap meet for $8, okay? And the thing I like about it is it's got a regular old style key chuck. I'm not a big fan of keyless chucks. Your bit tends to spin in it. If you got a drill bit, it tends to spin. Anything round tends to spin in it. Your higher quality drills these days will have a pretty good keyless chuck, but my theory is I'd rather have several of the low quality drills than one of the good quality, and the reason for it is just for this job is a particularly good example. We're going to be drilling pilot holes because I don't want to split the wood, and then we're going to be driving in our screws. And I don't want to be going back and forth changing bits from one to the other. They even have quick disconnect drills. You'll see that advertised on some tool commercials, but you still are messing around switching bits. It's just so much easier to, if you have several operations, to take a drill, have one drill set up for each operation. It's going to save you tearing your hair out. It'll give you an excuse if all you have is a cord drill to buy a cordless drill, and then you have a little bit more flexibility, or vice versa. But I think I own like 7 or 8 drills. I didn't buy them all at once. I got them over the course of time. And I've never regretted the expenditure. Oh my God. I'd be in so much better shape financially if I wouldn't have bought those drills. You know, those thoughts never came across my mind. Because first of all, look, I bought pretty cheap. This is a pretty cheap, this is a cheapo. And this is a $8 swap meet one. And if you're doing 90% of your work in the shop, where you have outlets every few feet, get yourself the corded version of a power tool rather than the cordless. The corded ones, they have one hell of a lot more power and torque, and it's never going to diminish. Okay, it's always going to have that much power and torque, no matter how long you've been using the tool. Your corded ones, your cordless ones, you know, your battery dies. Okay, you might have a charger and a spare battery. Okay, fine, so you can, but this is what happens, folks. It's been months since you used them. You come in to do a job and both batteries are dead. So then you gotta wait another 8 hours while those batteries charge. And like, you were in the zone to do a job now. One other thing, there's a difference between the nice, clean woodworker's shop, dedicated woodworker shop, and the auto mechanic shop, which this tends to be more than the woodworker's shop. Your various tools, vices, and things of that nature, they tend to get kind of greasy and dirty. So if you're doing some woodworking project where you're going to be staining it later, you really don't want to get that grease all over everything else. Plus, in a way to keep from the vice marring up the wood, in this case I got a little piece of foam core here, but any piece of wood or any scrap piece of material will do. Put it in your vice jaws to both protect the wood from marring of the vice and also just getting the grease on the wood. So now I'm going to talk about two things here. First of all, we're going to be drilling pilot holes here. I'm using deck screws to put this together because that's what I have, and I just don't want to go to the store. And just because of their nature, deck screws are pretty resistant to rust. But the other thing I want to mention to you is pilot holes. Now, you don't use pilot holes in general when you're building a deck. You're just rocking and rolling, driving them through. But decks are usually soft woods, green treated, pressure treated woods. They tend to be quite wet, quite moist, and they have a lot more give to them than dried out lumber. When you're using dried lumber for a project, you probably are going to want to drill some pilot holes. I know it takes some extra time, but it's going to prevent your wood from splitting, and that's going to save you a lot of frustration. The other thing I'm going to mention here are square Nazis. There's all kinds of people that, you know, they're going to be checking to see if something's square every step along the way, and that's important on something like a wall when you're framing your house, because if something's on a square, that mistake is going to transfer itself to when they're installing the drywall, when they're installing the trim A mistake there on something being off square is a major, major thing, and you want to be very careful that it is within square. But something like these window boxes where something being slightly out of square, that just ends with the window box itself. You're really not going to have to worry about anything else. If it looks good to the eyeball on a small project like this, that's good enough. If you want to check it with a square, that's fine too. But we're not looking for perfection here. We just don't want the the passerby looking at it and say, oh wow, what a terrible job. So that's what we're aiming for here. We will check for square, but we're not going to get too worried about it. All right, one other thing, I do have the cheap drill, 14 volt Black & Decker. Not a whole lot of power, not a whole lot of battery life. So, we get down to the very end, it tends to not have enough oomph to countersink that screw quite the way you want to. But also, it's not that big a deal. It'll drive her down. And to get control and to make up for the fact that my drill doesn't have enough nuts right now to run these in, I'm just using a Torx bit on a regular 1/4 inch ratchet handle. And that way I have total control and I can just snug them down so they're flush without cracking the wood. So it's almost an advantage to me to have it that way. All right, and for all you square Nazis out there, I mean, this is totally good enough for me. Passes the test on both sides. Like I say, eyeball, it's good enough for me. It's a window box. It's not a wall on a 2-story house. All right, and there right here is just a more or less finished product. I still got to put the stain on it and attach it to the house. But there you have it. It's relatively square. Square enough where, your brother-in-law or buddies aren't going to go look at it and say, boy, you're not very square there. It's pretty cockeyed. It passes the eyeball test, and that's really all it has to do. I put the center stringer in the bottom just to prevent it from either bowing in or bowing out as the course of time goes by. All the liner, the entire weight of the liner is supported by this lip. So that doesn't even set on that center stringer. That's just to prevent it from bowing in and out. And so now at this point, all I have to do is apply a finish to it and attach them to the house. All right, we got 4 out of 5 of these done now. And at this point, probably be a good time to sit back and ask yourself, what would I have done different if I could do this all over again? One of the things I was thinking of, I might have gone with stainless steel hardware just to prevent some rust from dripping down should the screws rust. Might have gone with stainless steel hardware if I could do this over again. It would have added a few dollars to the price of the project, but no real big deal. Probably would have done that. The other thing I would have done, and I'll show you on this, my last one. If you noticed, I mounted these end pieces flush with the side pieces. If I could do this over again, I would have had the side pieces stand proud. In other words, I would have built it like this. Let's see if I can get this put together good enough so you can see what I'm talking about. I would have built it so my side pieces didn't come to, end pieces didn't come all the way to the side pieces. That's called having the side pieces stand proud. And there's a couple reasons for that. First of all, when you have something flush, it's got to be totally flush to look good. And flush means meeting up perfectly, the two ends meeting up perfectly. Now, try as you may with lumber, quite often this is almost impossible to do because wood does a thing called cupping. You see how the grain there, since the trees grow, the rings are round on a tree? Well, you'll see them there on the end of the board. And the board will do a thing called cupping. And what it basically is, if this was a board, the moisture tends to make it, instead of being flat, it'll tend to kind of go like that in the shape of the rings. Once the wood absorbs moisture, it goes through cycles of getting moister and drier, and it tends to cup. And I don't know if you can see it on these, but It does tend to cut. It's flush here in the center, but sticks out a little bit here on the end. And the thing is you're not going to notice it. You're going to notice the flowers. You're not going to notice the cup and the board, but you truly wouldn't have noticed it if I would have had these ends here stand proud. And plus it adds a little bit of a decorative feature to it. So I would have had these ends stand out about 3/4 of an inch, the side pieces from the end cap. But it's too late to do anything about it now, and what people are going to notice is the flowers, not the window boxes anyway. And that's why I didn't get too fussy on whether something was square or not. I built a liner so there was enough room to allow for, that'll expand some when there's dirt in it. But so they drop in and come out easy regardless of the temperature. So these aren't going to sit in there perfectly square anyway, but it's certainly going to mask the fact of whether the window box itself is perfectly square. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time sanding these either, because I just don't see the return on investment. If you want to, if you're that fussy, go ahead, sand them up, knock your socks off. But once these are put on the house, most people look at them from the distance. They're going to be focusing on the flowers. I just don't see the return on investment sanding. If you want to sand them, go ahead. I'm not going to. This particular one here, maybe I should pay a little more attention. A little bit beat up on the end there, but the way these are going to be sitting on the house is I have two windows that are side by side. So I'll just have that on the inside. So I'll have one window box there and one right there. So no one's going to notice that. When you're orientating your boards as you build these, take into account the flaws on the wood. Now, one of these I have a perfect example on. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah, this one right here. And this one right here, it's beat up. Lumber will often be that way when you buy it from a store. It's beat up right there. Rather than having that at the front, this is the side that's going to face the house. And no one's ever going to see that. So we'll have this side facing out, and this side looks just fine. So that takes care of that problem.